Welcome to Pro Pitching. My name is Anna Souza. I'm the forum producer. Thank you for coming out to day one of Forum. Yes. We are not allowed to play favorites with panels, but this is a panel where there's a lot of interaction, which is very, very fun. The way this works is we're going to do half an hour of a regular conversation, and then at the half-hour mark, we're actually going to have 3 filmmakers who have been pre-selected pitch right here in front of the panelists for 5 minutes each and get their feedback from the panel. So hopefully everyone can get a little something out of that. Yes, yeah, please, huge round of applause for the brave filmmakers who will be pitching today. Thank you. So without further ado, please welcome up our panelists. I'm going to hand it over to Patrick Gomez with Entertainment Weekly, who is going to moderate.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So yes, as the panelists get their seats taken, I could introduce them, but I actually told them that I know they're going to hear your pitches later, but I want them to give me their elevator pitch on who they are and how they ended up here, being able to hear your pitches. So Liliana, why don't we start with you?
Man, sitting next to you makes me start first.
Yes, that's how that works. That is how that works. There's rules.
I'm Liliana Granados. I am from LA, born in Mexico. I got into filmmaking growing up in a beauty salon, just hearing stories from people from all walks of life. I pursued filmmaking at USC, graduated, started at CAA. From there, I did a stint in film finance, and then I moved over to Viola Davis's production company, Juvie. I was with them for 3.5 years. Worked on Woman King, worked on another very special film, that's being shot right now in South Africa. And then I transitioned over to Tripas, which is Eugenio Derbez's production company. And I was there for 9 months, and now I've transitioned into independent producing. So I'm excited to be here with y'all and give some insight on filmmaking.
Also a Trojan here. The y'all that you just said.
Oh, yeah.
Where's that betraying?
I don't even know. It's inclusive.
Okay, because I'm from Texas, so I was like, wait, do we have even more in common?
No,
But
I'm from LA.
all right.
I'm from Inglewood, but
y'all
I say
it's
y'all.
gender inclusive. It's easier to say. More people need to adopt it.
Yeah, y'all.
Not what we're here to talk about. Graciela, will you go next?
Okay, Patrick did tell us we only had 30 seconds, and I am nothing if not an A student. So I was like, oh my God, it's 45 seconds. So nobody time me. I want to get that out there. But yes, my name is Graciela Garcia. You can call me Gracie. I'm an executive at Cinetic Media. I work across management and finance. I am also a producer and facilitator of new work, right? My goal is to find the best path forward for filmmakers and their projects. Born and raised in LA, I went to Wesleyan on the East Coast to study film, produced theater in New York for a little bit before coming back to LA, finding a real home at Cinetic, where I get to champion multi-hyphenates and their work. I also just produced one of our clients' short films. So all of that to say, I know what it's like to put a project together, to pitch, package, but also how to be in the trenches on a short, and then how to get something out into the world.
I think that was closer to 30 than 45.
Yeah. If you timed it, I think it was 45, but that's okay.
You did great. Matt, we'll conclude with you.
Sure. Hi. My name's Matt. You can call me Matty. Philly Jew. I went to film school. It was a huge waste of time and my parents' money. I worked in New York through that period, moved out to LA. I worked in a mailroom, worked for producers all through my 20s. I also worked in indie film finance and got let go right before the pandemic. Great time to be unemployed. Started repping filmmakers from my couch, like managing overnight, and was at a small company for 2 years and then joined Rain last July. Fun fact, I was here a year ago when I signed my contract with Rain, so full circle. I manage writers, directors, writer-directors. I don't rep actors because I cannot afford that kind of therapy. But yeah, I'm an obsessive cinephile. I love what I do. I love being a champion for independent voices and also for commercial voices, and that's about it.
Well, thank you all for being here. Very excited to get these pitches heard and presented to you all, which is kind of where I want to start. Obviously, we all have, in this room, I'm assuming we all will sit around and pitch our projects or ideas to our friends and such. So I'm sure in your schooling and all of that people would pitch, but in a non-formal way. As you all started to develop and get to the parts of your careers where people were pitching you, what were you all most nervous about in terms of being receiving those pitches? Because obviously it's nerve-wracking to go stand at this mic in a minute and give 5-minute pitches, but I have to imagine that there's some nerves at least in the initial days of knowing how to respond to a pitch.
For sure. I think it's nerve-wracking to remember characters' names if you have more than 10 characters. To laugh at the appropriate moments. I think I've done improv in the past, and I think when you're in improv, you also have to be your friend's audience. So you like work on a fake laugh, and you're like, "That's hilarious," and you want to be interactive. Yeah, totally. I never thought about it, but it is, I think, like nerve-wracking to also listen and make sure you're remembering every plot point so that you can ask the right questions.
Yeah, and I think when I started hearing pitches, right, I was on Zoom. And there's something like, there's so much more emotional labor that goes into being on Zoom, just at all. But when you're hearing someone like sort of pour their heart out and like give a pitch, it can be challenging to feel really present, especially when, so much is on Zoom these days. And everyone I talked to before I came here, I was like, what do you say about pitching? Like, give me some advice of what I'm going to say. And everyone was like, oh my God, we hear 10 pitches a day on Zoom, and it can be really brutal. Again, just trying to there's something so much easier about sitting here, I'm listening to you.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at you. But when you're on Zoom, you're kind of yes,
performing.
There is. Yeah. So I think that's hard.
Yeah, there's a lot of nodding that has to, but legitimately pitching is so important. This is an example. I had a client, he wrote a short story and we took it out and it got a lot of interest, but you can't just sell something off a short story because it's the first 2 acts of something. So then he has to meet every single producer and pitch. They're like, well, what's the movie? And he has to pitch the whole movie. And then we have to go on Zoom and he has to I'm like, walk me through the whole movie. You have to be very slow. They know what it is. And it's just it's a form of training, beat by beat, not going too fast. It is nerve-wracking, especially over Zoom. I don't like Zoom anymore. I'm over it. But yeah, it's definitely a skill that you should just, even with some clients are just not good at pitching. It's not an easy thing to teach someone.
Yeah,
So.
and I think we're always rooting for the person pitching. And because it is a skill, I've been in pitch rooms where someone maybe comes from a theater background and they are performative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your story is better from someone reading off a paper. So really listening to that and saying, I'm rooting for you and I'm rooting for the story, no matter if you're giving me a one person show or not. The content will be there. If you're a writer, yeah, maybe you don't like being up in front of someone, but we're always rooting for you.
How hard is it to turn that off or not get kind of wowed if Viola Davis comes in and pitches you versus someone that's reading off a paper that you're not familiar with? How do you distill down to the essence of the story and whether or not it's something that you personally want to get involved with telling?
I think it comes down to the pages. Yeah, I think it comes down to the pages at that point. You can feel that excitement. Maybe if someone gave a good pitch, that script might get it to the top of my pile, right? And so I'm going to read it faster, but it's going to come down to the page to see if it's really on paper. Because you can also have a great performance and it's just not there on the page.
Yeah, and I think you can speak to this too from the management side, right? It's we also have to think about who our clients are pitching to and what they want, and I think everyone says they have mandates and they all end up being the same. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough market right now, right? Synetic, we work a lot in docs. So our sales team does a lot of doc pitching, and at a certain point, people are like, well, we want true crime. So like, where's the salacious, and you're like, well, I'm trying to tell an important story. So, I think that like at a certain point, knowing you can't do it to like what someone wants, but
you're constantly like tweaking. Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
But like if you're pitching like 20 producers and 15 of them want something, and the other 5 want a little bit more romance or a little bit more genre, like you're gonna spend that time to like tweak the pitch so that it's more of like those elements for those 5 producers, because it just is like kind of covering your bases.
Yeah, and you want like what Liliana said about having it at the top of their pile, right?
Yeah,
and like
of
how
course.
they can sort of imagine it in that way,
And everybody pitches. Like I have friends who I don't rep who are directors, and I'll sit with them and I'll just casually say like, "What are you working on? What are you writing?"
Yeah.
And even that is like kind of a form. We're just hanging out over coffee, but they're like, "Well, I have this thing, and it's about," and then, I'm not trying to manage them, but they're just trying to explain what their film is about to me, and I'm like, "That sounds terrible," or that sounds amazing. I want to read that. Like, so that's.
I'm sure all of you are doing that a lot this week, right? When people are like, "Oh, tell me about your short," and you're like, "Oh, right, what's the log line that I had to write to get into all the festivals?" And so I think at a certain point, performance is certainly important, right? And like, I grew up as an actor, so it comes to me really easily, but I don't know, but I think at the end of the day, the material is what's important, and if it's important to you, that will come through, I think.
Yeah.
Matt, you mentioned kind of coaching your clients and such. What do you all see most frequently in terms of like, oh, they shouldn't have done that, or oh, they should tweak? Is it? I guess I don't want to prescribe what your answer is. What are some common? I don't even want to say mistakes, but just speed bumps that you see people experience in pitching?
Over Zoom, it's just it's very easy because they're talking too fast, and if it's a multi-character thing, I can't keep track of it. It's just too many characters, too many plot lines. The way to simplify that is, this is not a mistake, but I'm always like, the Hollywood part of my brain is like, list the comps, like it's this meets this, which I know is really silly, but at least it matches my like cinema brain, where I'm like, I know I've seen those films. I know exactly where we're gonna go. The going too fast thing. I think like you can kind of ramble for a little bit too long. It's just like this weird thing that happens over Zoom where, again, if you're not in a room with someone, you don't sense their energy. It's like very hard to pick up if people are engaged or not, because you have no idea if people are engaged over Zoom.
Yeah, and like with the comps, I think a common pitfall is people do comps based on plot. I think that happens a lot, and people leave out tone, and the tone is really important for your project. And so I would think about comps more so in terms of tone, right? We had someone pitching us. She was like, yeah, it's kind of like Call Me By Your Name. And then we read the script, and I was like, yeah, but it takes place in like World War I, and it's really sad. Like, just because they're two men in love, right? So I think comps are actually important because, and someone gave me this advice once, which I really like, and I don't prescribe to it, but it's like, if you're pitching a TV show, your comp should be a movie, and if you're pitching a movie, your comp can be a TV show, because then you're like, oh, that's like the TV show of Call Me By Your Name. Oh, I want to buy that. So that's like, but there's like stupid tricks like that, and at the end of the day, I think just remembering to at least talk about tone. And the other thing that, again, when I asked all my coworkers, I was like, what do you guys think? Everyone said the same thing, which is like, both context, right? Know who you're pitching to, where they are coming from, sort of like what we had talked about. But if you're pitching a manager versus pitching a producer, like it's a very different way to approach it. And my coworker who went to business school said, bottom line up front, bluff. Which I like, just in that, give us the log line, but tell us the format, right? Give us the comps, like just tell us what it is, because they're hearing so many pitches. And so it's like, okay, that's the one. I can remember that in 1 or 2 lines or something, right?
How do you stand out in like if you're pitching something high concept, then people will respond like it,
Yeah. Or even think about what stood out from what we said, right? I'm like, oh, Matt, Philly Jew. Right, okay. I remember him now.
Yeah, he watches way too many movies. Yeah.
I want to dive into comps and just break it down. So comps, I feel like, is this buzzword. Just to clarify, it's comparative films. What is your film comparative to? A common mistake is like, well, it's never been done before. And it's like, okay, I personally, this is a personal point of view, I don't believe in that. I remember in high school, my teacher was like, Titanic is Romeo and Juliet on a boat. And my little 16-year-old brain was like, that is insane. So I personally do think that every story has been told. My advocacy in this industry is I want to see it from a new point of view or in a new way. So that's very important for you to identify it's this meets this, but I'm telling it with this twist or with this point of view. This is what makes it different. And also having the clarity of like, this is why it's a comp. If it's just, oh, two men in love, is that really a comp? Or is it, as Gracie was saying, tone is so important. So a common mistake is not including comps at all or saying, well, it's unlike anything you've seen. Because as we've all been mentioning, we've read so much, heard so much, watched so much. Like we might, be reading something 40 pages in, I'll know how it ends. So it's really hard for you to be like, it's, unlike anything. It's like, well, I've actually seen a movie from the 1940s that it reminds me of. I don't know. Like, Matt is a big, cinephile. Like, I'm sure he would have that response.
No, my biggest problem is when I reference comps, like I'll be pitching stuff, and I use comps all the time, and with clients, like, even if it's something that's like an older film or like a TV series that maybe not many people have seen, it's like you have to have like updated comps because like I'll be pitching something and I'll be like, it's this meets this, and it's like two old 70s movies, and they're like, what? And I'm like, it's Bridesmaids meets Get Out, and they're like, oh, of course.
That'd be dope.
Yeah. I just give up. No.
In sales, our rule was 10 years and sooner because we would actually use the numbers of these films to say, well, if this movie made this much money in this territory, in this country, we think this script will make this much money. And so we would sell it to those countries for around that estimate. But I wasn't able to pull things from 20 years ago. The other thing to mention about comps, coming from that sales background, is if you're trying to make a $3 million film, don't compare it to a $100 million film. Like, it's like, and also look at how successful that movie was, because you don't want to compare it to a movie that didn't make a lot of money. That's going to be a turnoff for the executive listening. It's like, well, that flopped. Are like you're comparing it to something that didn't have the acclaim. So you want to be careful about doing your research with your comps.
We're going to give the three people presenting their pitches 5 minutes today. Obviously, there usually is, you're on the Zoom, and the Zoom is scheduled for a certain amount of time. Talk to me about length of pitch, though. Like, should people be trying to use every second of that meeting time, or is it best to keep it condensed to a 5-minute pitch? Can pitches be too? Is there a general rule, or is it different for every single one?
Pitches can certainly be too long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think 15 is like, I mean, we're not going to do 15, but if you're over Zoom and you have, if it's like a 1-hour meeting or a 45-minute meeting, you would, the best thing about if you're pitching over Zoom is sometimes like the executive can kind of stop and ask questions, which is the best thing that they can do. And then it becomes much more of a conversation. And the execs will, and you can see an executive like, oh, I see where it goes. And then you're like kind of holding their hand as you take them through it. And that's like a really, I don't know, good thing to have.
It's also when it's a conversation, I typically ask, do you mind if I ask questions in between? I want to respect if you have something rehearsed, I'll respect that, and be patient in those 15 minutes and maybe jot down notes while you're speaking and say, okay, I'm going to ask more questions about this. But don't feel like the pitch has to answer every question. That's why it will become a conversation at later points, and you will get the time to say, well, yes, I'm establishing that in this way. So don't feel like it has to be beat by beat. My rule is give me the beginning, middle, and end, which you'll be surprised. Sometimes you don't get the beginning, middle, and end. So definitely including that, and then you can fill them in details as they ask questions. But if you're going beat by beat, I'm like, I really didn't have to know that small detail.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to remember is pitching is not selling. right? Like, I don't know, Cinetic's a sales agency, so like that's our job, right? Like leave the shilling to the agent or the manager. And I think that's important, that you don't, like, you're there to tell your story and connect with the person. And as sort of scary as that sounds, shorter is better, because they're seeing 100 pitches a day, they're reading a million things, like they're thinking about picking their kids up from school and their shopping list, and they're looking at the email that just came in on their Zoom, and they're like, oh man, there's
Guilty,
15 different
yeah.
things going in over. Yeah, and it's hard not to. I mean, that is the pitfall of Zoom, but even when they're in person, right? It's hard. We are people. So I think that's the point of keeping it short, is to sort of keep people fully engaged.
You've mentioned tailoring a pitch depending on where they might be pitching and what they know they might be looking for. What guidance do you have for those out here who are like, how do I find out how do I know what they're looking for, and how do I make those pivots?
I would just do your homework on the person, like know their background, know who you're pitching to, know where they are in the company, right? It's like there are exec flowcharts out there. I'm not saying you have to get them, but like do a little Googling, do a little homework so you know who you're meeting with. I think that can be really helpful. And you don't have to be like, okay, I'm meeting with Netflix docs, I have to pitch them a true crime, and this isn't a true crime. Because the thing about mandates is that like they expire, and like people will see something and go, well, maybe it doesn't fit their mandate on paper, but so I think it's doing your homework, and that can be done on Google. Like that's easy enough, right?
Everyone's on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, in my bio, I think I included, this is like also a thing, but like I included my favorite films in my bio for this festival, but that's not like not what I'm trying to sell. Like I'm not taking out an ace in the hole spec, like that. No one has seen that movie. But like I have my own mandate of like what I know. So much of what I'm trying to do is like finding a filmmaker's sensibility and knowing what will sell, and being a creative enough person and meeting those two things in the middle, where like I can see what a filmmaker is going for. Like I'll say, come back to me with 10 log lines, and I'll be like, okay, you're gonna write that one, and this is what it's gonna be like, and then we jam on the idea and we develop it, and that's like the best kind of creative partnership. So I have the things I'm looking for. Like I'm gonna say this now. I love erotic thrillers. I'm always looking for erotic thrillers. But that's like not in my bio. That's like not in my bio. I'm not gonna include that in my bio. That would be so weird.
Speaking of creative collaborations, I love working with filmmakers who have a manager. It's okay if you don't, but I love the collaboration with reps, because typically if you have a rep, they will set you up with a general meeting. So you're just shooting the shit with that person, and you're getting to know what movies they like, how many kids they have, like what they like to do for fun. And you do that meeting first, so that perhaps when you do have a project that you're trying to formally pitch, you already know their interests. So for me, for example, my last job, my title had me only working in drama. Do I only like drama? No. And so what we do as producers and managers, our job is to build those relationships for you. And again, sometimes you're building them yourself through these general meetings. But I can say, maybe Netflix is looking for horror. My client, or the filmmaker I'm producing for, doesn't necessarily, it's not a super gory horror, but it has some horror elements. I'll pitch it to them. And especially because I know my buddy who works there is a father, and this is really a father-daughter story. So I think they're really going to connect with this story. So there's some curating that sometimes you can go and slip under the mandate, because you know that executive is going to love it. I am producing, for example, Indian film, and I was able to get it into this financier. This white dude was married to an Indian woman, and he was like, I totally understand the cultural nuances of this story. This totally reminds me of my family. And that was our in. So sometimes these things aren't super obvious because he himself wasn't an Indian executive, but that connection really got us through the door. So it is important to be personable. And if you can, you have those generals. If not, like your producer, your reps, they will have those like little clues. We will tell you, hey, ask them about that. Ask them about this subject that they're into. Ask them about whatever. If it is a father-daughter, like hone in on that element of your project and you'll get them. There are like tips and tricks you can do. I do think it's selling. I do think as a filmmaker, you're selling the story. You're not going to say, well, this is going to make this much money. That's not your job. But there is a way to kind of pull at their heartstrings if you have that information.
Just a little light stalking, that's all.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure this will be online. You listen to their interviews. You stalk them if they're on public. And you're like, oh, well, now I have information I can use.
Matt, I feel like you maybe are in the weeds with this the most, but would love to hear from all three of you. In terms of tailoring a pitch or making tweaks, how much is too, like, when do you decide this was too much of a tweak and so it's just, that's not a right fit to even try?
That's a great question. It has to be like, this is going to sound so silly in Hollywood. If it's a high concept of enough pitch, like if you're pitching an action adventure movie with a little bit of romance or like a grounded sci-fi film with like more of a horror element, there are like films where you can kind of pinpoint or like, okay, this film does a little bit of like, Ex Machina is a great example. Like it's a grounded sci-fi film with a little bit of like sexy romance weird thing in it and it's like a little scary at the same time, and you can kind of pick, like, again, going back to mood, like the thing that we took out that we sold, it was like, it's these two films, but it's this mood. It's like this world, and I want you to imagine this world in these films. So like remove, and it worked in this like very grounded sci-fi kind of way, but I don't like to tweak too much. It's more of just like stealing a little bit of mood and tone from like other films, and then, other places are like, oh, we want this to be like a YA they want it to like be like a very hardcore romance. And if that's the case, I'm like, this is probably not, just depending on the pitch, it's like not probably what it is. Yeah.
And as you're listening to pitches, if they're not making the tweaks, like, do you sometimes do that on your end? Be like, okay, well, that doesn't fit this, but if we did, like, when you're...
I'll make the tweaks. I'll just be like, this is not going to sell, or that's not what you should say. And yeah, I don't know. It's just a dialogue of like, this is what I think they're looking for. Like, I wouldn't reference this. I would also like you're talking to producers who have made like tons of movies, so you can always go back into their arsenal and just stroke their ego.
Yeah.
And reference films that they've made themselves, and they're like, oh, I love that film. Like that's, it did so well for us. Yeah, but your taste is not always going to match the producers. I mean, her boss, John Sloss, has produced some of the greatest dramas, like.
And some comedies.
And some comedies.
David Gordon Green.
Shady
Car.
Oh, yeah.
We got some comedies in there.
Incredible salesman.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that I keep pointing back to that Liliana said is like, they're going to read, like, the idea, hopefully, is that they'll read the script. So don't come in there and be like, okay, they're looking for YA romance. Like, I can change this whole thing. Like, obviously you're not going to do that, right? So I think that, yeah. And it's funny you mentioned Sloss, right? Because you think of, like, when he was selling, like, Linklater's first movie or Rian Johnson's first movie, right? A lot of what Cinetic does is sell finished films. So there's only so much tweaking you can do. And we recently had a project where they were like, well, could we go back and open up the edit? It's like, not totally, but, but I think, yeah, you think of, like, those early movies, and sometimes people are just excited to find, like, a strong voice and something they've, a version of something they've never seen before, right? Like Liliana said. So I think that I wouldn't worry too much about like tweaking it to a specific mandate or something, but do your homework, right? Like know who you're talking to, like what we're saying. Not so that you can change your entire story, but so you can go in there prepared. And so you're like, okay, I'm pitching to these people, and this is the work that they've done, and I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I want to be careful about the term tweaking, because I do think that you have to be true to yourself. It's, for me, I would say highlighting certain things. So I've worked at places where the word indie darling is like a bad word, because they don't want Sundance indie darling. They're like, those are small films, they don't make a lot of money. So even though you're like, oh, it's gonna have a lot of critical acclaim, I would say, let's pitch it as like this commercial fun thing. Let's highlight the universality of this story so that it doesn't feel so niche. Going back to this project that I mentioned, the financier that I set it up with, they were looking for higher budget projects. And so the edits that they make is, how can we expand the story? Right now it takes place in 2 locations. How can we have these characters go further out? Let's expand the relationships. And we were doing it for a while and it just didn't feel right. We were like, this is an indie darling. This is a very intimate story. And it got to a point where, the executives, the company itself changed their mandate. They let go of the project, but it was kind of a relief because it was like, this isn't fitting. And now it's set up with a different company and they're like, yeah, let's do this for $2 million. Let's make it super small. Like, let's do string shoe budget. And so you do want to, as I mentioned with your comps, be conscious about the tone of it, but also the budget. And if you're pitching to an independent financier who has less money than a big studio, maybe again, like you're like, yeah, I know a lot of your films have gone to festivals. This is an indie darling. And if not, like, what are ways in which you can genuinely see yourself developing the story in that direction? As Matt mentioned, there are some high concept projects that you're like, okay, we can lean a certain direction or another. But I always ask, even when I'm listening or I do script consultations, I hate to use the word pitch because sometimes it does feel like a scary word, but just where do you see the story? So that I'm not saying, yeah, make it more of a romance or make it an action. You don't want to tweak it so much that you end up selling something and then they're like, yes, we were sold on this idea, and you're doing notes and revisions and it's not even the story you wanted to tell. And you hear a lot of filmmakers like sometimes getting stuck in that, like trying to please the executive, and it becomes very far from what they wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, pitching can be a scary word, but we're going to move to that section of this discussion. So I know we have 3 filmmakers who are prepared to do their 5-minute pitches. We do ask that you keep them to the actual 5 minutes, so we have time for the feedback in between. And I believe Aaron is the first one. Yes, hi.
Can I share something super quick? Hi, Aaron. Just quick little things to keep in mind. I should have emailed you this.
No worries.
I do have, if you can, I came up with 6 W's. Who, what, where, when, and also why you and why now. And we can talk about that later, but yeah.
For sure. No, that's fantastic to keep in mind. So you want to go ahead, Aaron?
I think I got these worked into here.
Yay!
My name is Erin Brown Thomas. Hello, everyone. And I'm going to pitch a feature film called Emergency Contact. Okay, so picture this. You're at a party you've been looking forward to for months. You're rubbing elbows, spending time with people you always want to spend time with. And bam, you get a phone call. It's the cops. They're asking about an old acquaintance of yours, someone you haven't seen in forever. Well, turns out they're dead, and you're their emergency contact. This is a true story that happened to my best friend and co-writer, Kelly Vrooman. Over the course of a week, I accompanied Kelly as we took care of her deceased friend's affairs. We notified her family, her job, her other friends. We even cleared out her apartment. And everywhere we went, the first thing anyone would say to Kelly was, "Oh, she talked about you all the time." Oh my God. At first, this was weird, right? Because, Kelly hadn't seen this person in a long time, hadn't really given her a second thought. But over the course of that week, Kelly came to realize the ways in which she had overlooked this relationship. And this entire experience caused both of us to re-examine the ways in which we assign worth to people. And it inspired this story. Emergency Contact is a dark yet hopeful dramedy. In terms of tone, think Little Miss Sunshine. In terms of plot, think Bridesmaids, as you suggested, but with a hint of Ingrid Goes West, just that little bit of social media climbing bite. All right? And it's a universal story. It's set within the social lives of the people who work in film and TV. The setup to our story is the same as it happened in real life. Our lead is Cooper. She's a career-focused social climber, and she has been overlooked in her profession and longs to have a small sliver, just a tiny little sliver of the success of her many friends. This week, she is the bridesmaid in the wedding of her TV star best friend, and that's when she gets a call that her acquaintance, Gia, has died. There's been no foul play. Gia simply drank herself to death in her apartment, all alone. Though busy, Iz feels obligated to take care of Gia's affairs, and she then makes a startling discovery. You guys, Gia was connected, like unexpectedly connected. Okay? From A-list members of Alcoholics Anonymous to celebrity late-night drinking buddies, Gia seemed to know everyone, including several key influential people that Iz has been targeting for years. People who could help her finally get her career off the ground. I mean, come on. Okay, yes. Seizing the opportunity is dons the disguise of Gia's best friend and arranges to throw a celebratory wake in her honor, inviting all of Gia's most important contacts. But as Iz uncovers the broad strokes of this desperate addict's final year, she uncovers a precious friendship that she neglected. Even worse, the charade throws the rest of Iz's relationships into question as everyone around her is questioning the authenticity of their connection with her. With everything precious to her hanging in the balance, Iz finds a true best friend in Gia post-mortem and learns that someone's net worth is more than just their network. Few dark comedies manage to leave a hopeful aftertaste, with themes of sobriety, friendship, and the universal worth of a human life. Emergency Contact is a darkly funny tale of social games, addiction, and redefining true friendship. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and there's a character named Gracie in it.
Oh, good. Sold.
If you would like to sit, but then when you respond, yes, please definitely be at the mic. Other than that, you choose to sit back or not. And I did congratulations. I think that was maybe like 4.5 minutes, so
Yes.
perfect.
You want to switch it up? Come on.
I'll go. I'll go. No. Okay, so just off the bat, that was great. My first note would just be, first of all, the movies you referenced, like that also you can just say in the pitch was like, so Little Miss Sunshine is a road trip movie where it ends in a beauty pageant, and Bridesmaids, the end of that movie is a wedding. So I wanted to know, like, what is the climax of the movie, like this journey that she takes with meeting all these like wonderful people and learning about herself. But how does that narratively, like in a momentum way, how does that build to something that's actually like what's the climax of the movie? Is it the wedding that she's in, or do things come to a head with all these people? Like, where does it all shake out, sort of? Like, obviously she comes to this beautiful realization about her life and sobriety, but like landing it at the end, like where does it, like what is she, like what's the, like, yeah, where does it
The oh
lead?
shit moment.
Yeah, where does it lead?
Yeah. For me, I like to sometimes give this as a warning. Coming from Viola's camp, it's all about character. And so defining her arc. So yes, she learns that your net worth isn't your network, but making that line land. So why? Why does she learn that? Yes, her motivations were like, ooh, I'm going to pretend to be her best friend because I want these connections. But what pivotal moment, what's the dark night of the soul? Like, what pivotal moment leads her to have a change of heart, really taking us through so that we're feeling for her is important. Because you mentioned it, but again, it's like, what's going to pull us into that whole journey.
Yeah, I love that you said it was a feature at the top, right? Format, want to know that. And you totally took what we said about the comps, right? And totally agree with what Matt said about it. I would put all of that first, right? Like I really enjoyed the story. I was totally like your first initial hook, right? If I'm there, I'm thinking about which friend of mine would it be, right? I loved that, but again, I wanted tone right away. I don't know if you guys feel differently, but because I'm listening to this story and it could go in various different ways. And then as soon as you said Little Miss Sunshine and Ingrid Goes West, I was like, okay, now I'm here with you.
I felt, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that like the scene that you open with, like that's the first. I'm assuming that's like the first scene of the movie, right? Like that's your first 2 minutes. So that's like stuff that you could be like, okay, this is the opening scene, but then really this is the actual movie. It's like this road trip to nowhere and back or to somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and tell us. I think I totally agree with Liana about character.
Lily gives great notes.
Yeah. Character and the beginning, middle, end, right? So exactly what Matt was saying of like, where does it all come to a head? The only other thing I'll say about, which is hard, is I get nervous about like film TV stories because it feels really inside baseball. And I think that can. I get nervous, not because I don't enjoy watching them, right?
No, I get
love
nervous too.
Call My Agent and Entourage. I'm sorry. But at a certain point, I think execs get a little nervous about it.
There is a common feeling that people in Hollywood don't want to tell stories about people in Hollywood. I don't think that should deter you. I don't like to follow rules generally. So again, if the story is strong, we'll tell it. As you mentioned, Call My Agent and Entourage. But it could be someone Snow. I think this character could have any job. So I think it goes into the why you, why now question that is always asked. It's why does she have to have this profession? I think the why you mentioned with your writer, it's obvious, that there's a very personal connection. The why now, I think, with the social media and you mentioning Ingrid Goes West is very present. I wonder if I hadn't watched Ingrid Goes West, if I would feel as strong for the why now. But fortifying that idea of this is very relevant to today's conversation. And this is why she has to be an aspiring filmmaker. But I think that, again, I don't like to say, it's never going to get made, but it's also, I think in this story, such a small thing that you didn't make it so specific that, could change if someone gave you that note, if someone took it on their slate and they're like, we're going to change that.
I'm here to facilitate, but I would say I also appreciated how a lot of things where I was like, I have a question about that, you did very quickly like find a way to answer it. Even when you mentioned it's about people in the industry, but it's about their personal lives. Like I thought you did a really great job of doing that. But I guess before we move on to if you have any questions about any specifics that they mentioned, I'd love to give you the opportunity to do that. But I would also say, you mentioned wanting to hear beginning, middle, and end, and in theory, you would think, well, I want to entice them to like make them want to read it, but you all are saying, no, I want you to explicitly just tell me the story.
Yeah, I think so. That's why I've done these panels before, and I'm just like, just give me the beginning, middle, and end. I know you want to entice us, but it feels a little bit unsatisfying. Like, and we want to know. You'd be surprised, and pitches end on the page. That sometimes I'm a big advocate for structure. And I know that there's stories where I love like experimental stories where it's like, we're not gonna tell you what to think, but you have to give us a reason. I think that, again, seeing who your audience is, I've worked at places that are all about a 3-act structure, and sometimes I have writers that are like, well, this is a 5-act structure, and I'm like, why? And then you also get people who are like, well, this is a trilogy, so I'm not going to answer anything in the first one. Again, why? for me as an audience, I'm big on structure, so I want to know that you understand it and that it's there and it's not going to be something that I have to find for you as an executive.
I also just wanted to say that I loved how you were prepared, but it wasn't scripted. I think that's another thing that, like, we talked about performing, and I think at the end of the day, it's like, I like that you had your notes, right? But you weren't like, right? And so I trusted that you were gonna like take care of us, but it felt like it came from you and
And time-wise, it was perfect, truly.
You
Yeah,
did a
it was
great job. Yeah,
awesome.
I want to read it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you want to hear, that somebody wants to read it. That's what we said. Before we move on, is there any specific follow-up question?
Well, the first question I did have was just, was it effective to, because I've gotten the note before of like, oh, is it inside baseball? But like, it's really, like, it's not industry-ish at all, other than the fact that like her friends are famous. So it's really more just like social dynamics. Did that line, you picked up on it, but I guess, was it not enough for everybody else to say it's set in their social lives?
I didn't think it was super. It didn't strike me as like a full Hollywood. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
oh, what a Hollywood story. Like I didn't take it that way.
I feel like my antenna's up, so I
Yes,
heard it, and I was like, oh my,
yes,
wait, you need
yes.
to know this. But I think the fact that you're
Yeah.
thinking about it means, also when you said Ingrid Goes West, I sort of went influencer-y,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
in just my thinking about it.
Yeah, it's more just about like, just the influence, like feeling like
Yeah.
less relevant in this world. Yeah.
Yeah, and status and.
That's
Yeah, It's
good.
more of a status
course.
So
story.
Yeah,
speaking of tweaks, I think maybe I agree with you, Gracie. I think my antennas went up when it's like she's in the industry. I'm like, oh. So it's maybe more like I agree. Ingrid Goes West. You're more thinking of the social climber. So, is she? What job? Because I was like, is she an actor? Is she an aspiring director, producer? So maybe you can give us specifics, or maybe it's like she's just into, being the person with the most followers, just a socialite. She's not, maybe she hasn't gotten far in her career because it's hard to build a career as an influencer. So it's not like an actual track. She's just like trying to be, with the who's who. So specifying that would maybe be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing I was wondering, like, when you're prepping these things with a time limit, if you add some, I mean, I guess I had a little bit of extra time left, but I adapted this from a 3-minute pitch where I would have not had any more time. So if I was gonna add more like articulation of arc and ending, what might I lose? Is there anything that I had in there that you're like, you leave that out for them to ask later? Or do I just need to?
Off of Gracie's point, I would probably say you could, if you were to like drop anything, you could probably lose the opening scene.
Just
Yeah.
that it really happened in real life?
No. Just like painting the picture of like going through everything that like you're at a party. You're like, this is what
Picture
happened.
this.
Yeah,
Oh,
picture
gotcha,
this.
gotcha.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that part.
No, it was
And that's
great.
the thing,
No,
you're going to get different answers
like,
from everyone.
You could trim it. You could just like, I don't know. Yeah, trim it. by
Yeah,
30
it could be
seconds.
1 second. Yeah, it could
Yeah.
be the seconds.
Well, I'll keep it for you.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. I definitely want to make sure that we have enough time to get through everyone. So may go a little bit shorter on the feedback and that sort of that on the next go around. But can we get the second filmmaker up, please?
Woo!
All right.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Tiger G. I'm here with my short film Death and Ramen, and I'm going to be pitching the feature version of Death and Ramen.
Yes.
In this playful and subtly philosophical dark comedy, Death and Ramen follows the life of a struggling Japanese-American ramen chef as he tries to rescue his mother's failing restaurant from a rat infestation. Set against the backdrop of the 7 days leading up to his mother Yuri Watanabe's passing, the film delves into the profound experiences of immigration, of family, of growing old. Kenny Watanabe is the chef, and Yuri, his mother, was born in 1945 in Hiroshima, just weeks before the atomic bombings. Yuri's journey has been one of resilience and immigration, and she found solace in food in the face of abject suffering and immigrated to the States and built her ramen shop in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles from scratch. Kenny is trying to save this ramen shop, and amidst this chaotic kitchen and the bustling customers, a mysterious food and safety inspector came to the ramen shop one night to inspect the rats. His name is Cecil, and he's dressed like a Mormon. He's wearing the long, like, sort of short, button-down shirt and shorts, and he's got like glasses in his pocket, and he speaks in a strange, kind of childlike and sexless manner. And turns out he is what we call a death clerk, which is my take on this bureaucratic version of this Grim Reaper trope. And Cecil has a single bowl of Kenny's ramen, and within that single bowl, we are taken through this sequence where he witnesses the dawn of humanity, and we're taken through all of life. And Cecil sort of begins to kind of be curious about what it means to be human. And he takes it upon himself to be the manager of this ramen shop, trying to save the ramen shop alongside Kenny. Choosing compassion over duty, Cecil then takes Kenny over this trip, this philosophical trip between the two of them, where they talk about trauma, they talk about immigration, they talk about what it means to be human and what it means to sort of forgive yourself and live up to standards that you couldn't necessarily live up to. I'm sure a lot of us in here are immigrants, children of immigrants that, came here for, to have a better life, and I certainly did. And when you are uprooted from your, life and your culture, and you are taken to a different world, the stakes are high, and you sort of have to live up to what your parents want for you. And Kenny struggles with that. And he especially struggles with that, knowing that his mother is sick, that he will never get the resolution that he wanted. And Cecil, ironically, the Grim Reaper, is the person or figure that is able to grant him this. Death and Ramen, of course, blends Asian American sensibilities, absurdist humor, and a fresh perspective on death itself. Think Synecdoche, New York, in a ramen shop. The film weaves together existential surrealism, playful storytelling, and introspective journeys and conversations. It not only portrays the trials and tribulations of running a kitchen like Hulu the Bear, but it also celebrates the vibrant and diverse community of the LA gastronomy scene. Through Kenny's emotional journey and his mother's inevitable passing, the film ultimately delivers a poignant lesson on self-forgiveness, with a bittersweet acknowledgement of Yuri's enduring legacy and the pain she inadvertently caused. Death and Ramen was also inspired by a profound lesson that I personally learned after the passing of my own grandfather, and I hope that it invites audiences to ponder one simple sentence: if we never left, our stay could never be meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
You got it. You got it, G.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just have to say, the fact that you guys are getting up here and pitching in front of this whole room, in front of us, like, it's very moving. I'm so impressed.
It's great.
So I have to say, your confidence and the way you approached it, the personal aspect, the why you, why now was so clear, right? Like, yeah, the last line nailed it for me, right? Yeah, I do have a grandmother who's an immigrant, so sure, but I think anyone might feel that way. Yeah, I am curious what you think about the comps, but I would have those again earlier. And when you talked about the short yesterday, you said something about like it's a buddy comedy, which I also really loved. In the shorts, if you haven't seen it, you gotta see it. It's really lovely, and it felt very funny too. And so I think that I just want to know that up front too, that it's like there's a mix, right? That it's about death and ramen. And yeah, and I'm sure that they'll speak on this too, but I would just say character arc. Give me, like, I wasn't sure if then he doesn't become a death clerk anymore and sort of goes on this journey. and then they sort of are living life together. Like, what's the longer? And again, I've seen the short, and hopefully the people you're pitching to will have watched the short, which gives you sort of a leg up. But it's like, okay, how does it get expanded exactly?
You'd hope that they've seen the short. Sometimes your producer or manager will send it, and execs will walk in and be like, "Huh? What? Oh, yeah, I haven't watched it." So you want to make sure your pitch is full enough to give them the full scope. This is totally something. This is my type of movie. It has food. It has immigrant parents. It has philosophical questions. So I'm going to be a bit critical. The film that I mentioned is a mother-son story, and it takes place, it's called The Dining Room, so it's food-related as well. So again, I'm super excited to watch the short and potentially read your film. All of that said, I actually, like I said, I'm going to be critical, but I think it's quite easy what my asks are. I would, if you have this written down, highlight anything that feels general. I feel like there was a lot of generalizations, which my creative brain is like filling in the blanks, like, oh yeah, existentialism, like immigration. But you don't want us to fill in the blanks. You want to tell us, maybe give us a glimpse of how your perspective is answering what it means to be human. I hear that a lot from filmmakers, like, oh, this is going to, it's about the human experience. It's like, well, what is the human experience? Because it's very different, someone living in Bel Air than someone living in Inglewood. What are those questions? And this is a perfect example, again, not having read your script, this is a perfect example where I don't need a nice bow tied at the end when we're talking about beginning, middle, and end. Maybe it is this philosophical questions where it's like, I don't know how I feel. And you walk out of the movie theater asking that question, and you're having people having different conversations. It's so beautiful when people have different answers, but I want to make sure that your question is clear. Your question, your thesis for that project, for that film is clear. What are you asking of your audiences? It just felt a little bit broad. And I don't know that it's on the page. I don't know that you know that because you didn't tell me that. But I think it's fixable. Just seeing, you mentioned immigration a lot, know your audience. When you say immigration, I'm like, yes, I get it. You don't have to explain it to me. So cutting some of that fat for someone like me would be easy.
Same with Mormon outfit.
Yeah,
we know what a
fun.
It was great
fun.
storytelling.
No,
but,
I loved it, but it was so good. You don't need to tell me what a Mormon wears. Like, I totally am with you.
Yeah. There's I think, I don't know. I'm like, I can see you writing this down and it's a quick edit.
Matt, really quickly, just because I know we are.
Yeah, sure. I would just say, like, the opening log line was like, you pitched this story of like this kid, and he loses his, this person in his life, and he has to save this restaurant from like a rat infestation, and that sounds like an indie darling, like this like really beautiful coming of age thing, and then midway through it becomes this like kind of Terrence Malick, Charlie Kaufman thing, like a very existential, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a completely different movie than like where the ending of the pitch sounded like a very different ending from like where we started, if that makes sense. And again, I know those films, like I know what you're going for, but again, like I didn't really get the character arc. Like, of course, it's like this beautiful conversation. It could be a play, like, and I have not seen the short, so I absolutely will. But yeah, like I was like, okay, but what is the movie if they're just talking and explaining life to each other in this? But like, again, what is it building to?
What's the oh shit moment?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you.
All right, and I know we have a third filmmaker somewhere out there. Yes, hi.
Woo. I hope we haven't scared you.
Yeah, I feel so unnatural. Like first time pitching in a film festival.
Oh, congrats.
So everyone, my name is Nico from Finland, and I'm here to pitch the feature documentary, A Santa Land. So the documentary is basically it's a continuity to the short film I was screening here, A Polar Night Light. So I keep on putting my camera on the dog sledding and the sled dogs in the Finnish Lapland. So the Santa Land story is about passion to fulfill one's dreams. In the film, the main character Emmy, she starts every morning in a dark winter morning in Finnish Lapland, Rovaniemi. She packs her 16 dogs in her van. She takes her 4-year-old daughter to the daycare, and then she drives up to the Santa Claus village to serve sled dog rides for the customers. And together with his mentor, Antti, who was the main character in this short I was screening here, they have a mutual dream to finish the toughest and longest sled dog race in Europe, Finnmarksleppet in Norway. And to fulfill this dream, they know that they has to work for the Santa Claus in the plastic land of Santa Porokylä. I cannot know how can it be translated, but anyway, the world is plastic. It's artificial. It's based on the story of a Santa Claus, and it's illuminated with red and green bulbs, and it's constantly full of the Christmas songs. And the character, so Emmi, she's representing a new way of dog sledding culture. She's a feminine, she's funny, she's full of emotions, and full of love for the dogs. I met Emmi like 5 years ago when she moved to the Lapland, where I was also working as a sled dog guide, and I quickly fell in love with this person, with her energy and the passion to do that. She came to the north whenever her daughter, Joanna, was big enough to take care of herself, but the next season she was pregnant again. And she decided that she's not going to stay home, but she's representing a mom that has the will and power to do whatever they want. And Antti, the second main character in the story, Antti is a retired sled dog musher. She cannot take tourist responsibility anymore because she has a dystony in the back that makes him shake like an autumn leaf. Well, Antti won't get away from the runners, but she's just finding a new ways to stand on there and be in the dog sledding culture. And Emmi she's getting quite famous in the dog sledding culture, and it's irritating and causing a lot of jealousy with the others. And also silently including Antti. So in the film, we follow their everyday life. If you see in the short movie or my style, I really love to put a lot of meaning on this. I really want to create the cinematic sets. So the films I'm referring to, they are like naturally Nanook of the North from Flaherty, and Ridge from the John Skoog, and The Rider from Chloe Zhao. So anyway, the world is there in between the documentary and hybrid. I'm blackouting.
It's okay.
There was something very important, something clever I was Yeah. But this is the story then. It starts in the December in the Finnish Lapland without no sunlight, just the bulbs. And it ends up to the Norway in the sled dog races when Emmi is standing on the runners and Antti is supporting her. But in the film there's 2 layers. One is with the mushers, and they love the dogs, how they're being with their dogs, and how they sense themselves through their dogs. What is the best for dogs is best for them. And through the dog's point of view, we are observing the world of the Christmas tourism, which is plastic, artificial. The workers in this Santa land, they are dressed as an elves, and they are forced to sing Christmas songs, and they are not even available to have the toilet breaks because they are elves.
Oh my God.
So that's the story.
Thank you.
In 2 layers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Even with that pause, it was still under 5 minutes. You did good.
You had me at 16 dogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gracie, I know you're the dog person.
Yeah.
I'll give you my 2 cents. Love your shirt. It's awesome when you bring something about your film into the room. So great note on that. I'm curious to know what the stakes are. What's dangerous for them? What is the conflict? Is it the jealousy? That I think would be the engine for documentary. I very much admire having to pitch a documentary. Working in documentaries myself, you discover the story while you're filming it. So I think you did a great job. And it's okay to say, we'll see where the story takes us because you're going to be following your characters. But having some drama will give us, will make us lean in and be like, well, let's find out. Let's make this. Here's 100,000 to, that's a lot of money for a doc, but let's go, let's find out what they do. So that's the big thing that I was missing.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect note, right? And it's hard because I'm of two minds, right? One of our clients had a documentary called Bitter Brush, which you should absolutely watch if you haven't. And it's about these female cowgirls in Montana, and it's beautiful. And I love it. And it's a indie darling, is I think the word we've been using. So it's hard. I think that I'm constantly thinking about how the doc market is really difficult and nobody's buying anything and it's really depressing. So that's one mind. And my other mind is I want to see these dogs sledding. So I think that what I would say to that is don't worry about the market and the commerciality of it. I love that you started telling us about the characters, right? Doc and narrative are very different, but they're also very similar, right? So character arc, sure, you may not know the ending, but what are the stakes? How does it sort of tell us a larger story, a larger universal story, right? Is there a climate change element to it? I don't know. I think that the Santa Claus stuff is fun, but I think you can say that once and give us the broader how is this going to appeal to audiences and
just building out the why. I mean, the Santa Claus stuff is great. I also reminded me of that great doc Honeyland. I think it's called Honeyland, about this woman who's this beekeeper, and nothing there is a villain in the story, but it's just you're just with her, and it's this incredible character. So just honestly, I don't know if you just the main woman and her everyday life and what her journey is in this crazy intricate small town of that right there is just fascinating to me. And then I feel everything whatever the jealousy, all that stuff comes after, but you also mentioned that it was a hybrid, it was, which made me a little confused because you were I have not heard Nanook of the North reference. That's great movie, but the Rider is a live action film, so I was oh, are you going to shoot fictional scenes and integrate it? I was just a little confused. That's all. Is it a hybrid? Is it a?
Yeah, kind of that was something I maybe should not have said. Definitely, I'm not saying that.
Oh, it's okay.
But that's what I heard actually from a documentarist that often in States they call a hybrid ones.
Got it.
It's I always build the set of scenes and let the things happen and observe those.
Yeah.
Sure, of course, yeah.
There's documentaries that will recreate scenes and they're hybrid because they're not all sort of fly on the wall. I took it more, I really appreciate that you spoke about your stylistic approach. So I know that you're not just gonna do medium close-up, medium close-up, medium close-up, interview. So I was yes, give me the beautiful setup. So I really appreciate that. Going back to similar with Death and Ramen, with documentary, as Matt was saying, character is very important. Like Gracie was saying, it was awesome that you were this is who they are. I'm excited to watch the short to get a glimpse of their energy. If you're pitching to someone who hasn't watched it, give us a small little tidbit of something that characterizes them. You're this is unlike anyone you've met. I'm thinking of my octopus teacher and thinking, I mentioned Death and Ramen because for documentary, what is the question that you're posing? Maybe it's a question that the subject has themselves. I'm sure you've done the short. I'm sure you've done extensive interviews with them. Maybe they're trying to ask themselves, can they be this super feminist dog sledder, right? How does that work in their environment? So I think it was beautiful the way you set up the world. I think the world itself could be very sellable. I agree with Gracie, a lot of documentaries nowadays, it's big celebrities, big names, it's a competitive market, but you have a really interesting world that is like very, I think I would call like Christmas land, very, big and almost like IP in itself. But, what are the stakes given the world that she lives in? Is she the only one? What are the challenges that she's having to face because she's trying to be true to herself? And does she sometimes feel like she can't be true to herself? So what's the big question? The big thematic question is a big thing.
And Honeyland, right, is also, it's a character portrait, but it's also about the bees and that we're losing them, and like it's a larger environmental crisis. So I think
Capitalism point on that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Of course.
yeah. So I think just give us the why, the why now
Yeah.
and
The
what
why
hooks
now.
us, because the hook of the dogs is great.
And you're teasing it with the whole plastic part of it. It's very fake. So you're teasing sort of some of those themes, but maybe you can lean into it a little bit more.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
you
and
for
thank you all. Thank you all for giving us a little 10 minutes over time, and thank you for sticking around to see that all the way through. Again, I know you mentioned how brave it was, but a special round of applause for those three of you that pitched today. I wish we had so much more time to dive into so much more, but that's why this panel is so exciting, because there's just so much to discuss. So thank you three for being here. Thank you all for being here. Please enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you.
Thank you.